Alright, another draft physics video presentation. Yay. Taking on a couple of the dissident types, Fractal Woman and Steve Scully, the two subjects, the Ferrocell, and a little conversation about gravity, let's say, and light and lensing and something like that, maybe. So, we'll see how it goes. And such. So I will cube my way to the right screen. Okay. Yeah, gimmick. But anyway, I like it nonetheless. Now that's not going to work. Probably not. Yeah, alright, I'll get rid of that. Okay. Anyway, alright, so Fractal Woman has done another video with this Ferrocell stuff, and she starts being credible in terms of pointing out some of the effects, and that, well, you could just turn this piece of glass on with this fluid and just, you could just reflect light and end up casting a shadow that ends up having a pattern in it, and then she goes further and does the experiment I did, and that pretty much ends the conversation about what a ferrocell is in some respects, just showing how the LED ends up reflecting light in certain locations where you can see light. Now, it's not making a fiber optic cable. It's not transmitting light through these little curves. That's not what's really happening. It's just where light ends up having the right angle, where you end up with a bunch of this light refraction, and we end up getting the light to our eye. So it's where the light ends up reflecting off surfaces in a particular way, because the angles are correct, you Brewster angle kind of thing. I mean, there's all physics for this, and it's just, they're just playing a game. So as I've pointed out in the past, there's videos you can, it's out there, and you can see all this stuff. So anyway, here's one where a guy puts a CD under in between the glass with just the LEDs. Okay, no ferrofluid. So it's just a CD with light reflecting off of it. Now, a CD has a bunch of rings in it, right? I mean, it's a spiral pattern. And here you end up with bent straight lines. Okay, so it's almost showing you exactly the opposite effect. The magnet is probably producing a bunch of straight lines, because that's what magnets do. In terms of, if you put a magnet face down, north side up or north side down, if I did iron filings, they would all just kind of point to the magnet. And so the irony is that if you created a substructure that was made out of straight lines, you end up with the curved lines perpendicular. And if you put spiral lines, you end up with curved lines perpendicular to the spiral. So, I mean, straight lines. So, it's a sort of a giveaway, in terms of explaining that, oh, this is just a toy, in the sense it's not showing you the real mechanics, the real physics. It's deceiving you. So if you want to be deceived, you look into one of these crooked mirrors, and that's what it's really telling you, is this is just a crooked mirror. It's not a device where you go to see the reality. It's a device where you go to see something that's an illusion, a fake, a distortion of reality. So the annoying part is that Fractal Woman, just shows she just doesn't have much credibility as anything called a scientist, because she's still selling the idea that the Ken Wheeler notion that light is actually being bent and all of this crap actually has some credibility, and has zero. That this pattern has anything to do with what the ferrite is doing in the fluid, the magnetic little pieces of stuff, the iron filings. It has absolutely nothing to do with it. So again, this is a video that somebody else made, but I showed the same thing, that this stuff is it just moves wherever you move the magnetic field. It does just what iron filings do. They move. All right, they align themselves to the field and create in an opposite fashion. Okay, the north-south magnets this way, and the little bits line up exactly, to match south end to north end, just as they're supposed to. They turn, and they would tend to want to just go right into the magnet, but they're in a fluid and the magnet's below them, so they don't just smash into the magnet. But that's what they'd want to do if they were truly free. But the trick is they're all opposite magnet. They're all the same magnet. So all the little pieces are all lined up the same. So they're opposite the main magnet, but all the little pieces are the same magnet. So they repel each other. And that's why there's distance between them. There's not because there's pathways there. There's no pathways. There's no lines of force in any real sense going those directions. It's just the way boats line up in the current. The current is completely different than how the boats line up. I mean, the real mechanism. But regardless, that's true of the pattern you see with iron dust. That pattern is just sort of an illusion. It really isn't showing you something real. It's showing you how small the grains of stuff you threw down are, how you threw it, how you vibrated it. All of that, it's telling you how distant they'll be. But there'll always be a distance based on their magnetic potential, which is kind of standard for each little piece, and so there's kind of a standard amount of distance between them because they're repulsive magnets. I mean, it just isn't that complicated. So I guess I should draw it. But anyway, the point is that you don't have to do much research at all. Okay, I mean, Ferrocell and microscope. There, you get this video. I don't know why mine doesn't show up, but I guess I didn't put microscope in the title. But yeah, the truth is, if you look under a microscope, you can see that the little iron filings are doing exactly the same thing they do, with iron filings. There's nothing different in the fundamental mechanics, and the difference is that you're looking at it in this distorted way. So I would theorize, haven't tried the experiment, but the CD sort of is a giveaway, that let's say you took a CD, and I don't know if you can't really sand one down, so let's not say that's a good idea. Just a piece of plastic, and you cut a bunch of spiral lines in it, straight lines going out from the center out, just straight diameter lines right through the center. Or you took a bunch of hairs, some very small, something less than 100 nanometers, some kind of thin wire even, and just did a bunch of thin wire going through the center, and then made yourself a ferrocell, that is directed light from the sides. I bet you'd end up with the same pattern, the same curve line pattern, because that's how the light reflects. And like I said, I've already made this argument, and to Fractal Woman, I think she heard it. And they're just ignoring the facts and just pretending there's some insight they're going to gain from the ferrocell, when everything about it, mechanically underlying all the mechanics, are all known physics. There's nothing surprising or new at all, and all they're doing is looking through a distorted view. They're taking the light and shining it just at the right angle and bending, and that's all they're doing. Okay, they're forcing it to look like something else. Just like I can take a lot of famous paintings and you can tilt them and look at them, and you can see that the artist painted a trick in there. Okay, he put a little bit of an optical illusion in there, and if you tilt the painting, you can see it says "fuck you," or some other kind of shit. I mean, you're just being tricked. Okay, it's not the real. You're not going to see anything real. That painting example isn't even a good example, because I should just use the example of a painting where it's just an accident. If you look at the painting at a certain angle, 1 minute it looks like Queen Elizabeth, and the next minute it looks like Bruce Dern or something. So anyway, I will explain further. Or more. Well, I guess we should full screen it for the sake of... there's not enough light in here, I suppose. I'll correct that next time, or maybe not. All right, so the simple argument is that a magnet is a dipole. All right, it has these two sides, and they're basically it's the same thing. I could argue that this is just an electron, and this is just a proton, because the function's very similar. And so you know that these are opposite forces, and I really should do them in color. I mean, I'm obviously arguing that the force in reality is in fact two different forces, but to make this argument, I really don't need that argument. But you need to understand that obviously it's just a fact that the south side repels the south side and the north side repels the north side, and vice versa in terms of the attraction. So you have to use some kind of way to distinguish those two. But there are no lines doing this, okay? This is a lie. Well, actually that piece of chalk didn't work very well. All right. There's no line that's actually doing anything here. There's no field line. There's no anything out here. This is all just something you end up seeing. All right. So it doesn't have anything to do with what's really happening. What's really happening is there is this attraction force for other north sides by the south side, in the sense that the south side is radiating a straight line force, and the north side is radiating a straight line force, okay? And the fact is those forces are mixing. That's what makes it a dipole. And so there's blue going where the reds are, and there's reds going where the blues are. So you can sort of understand that they're mixing into each other in places. But that the lines, okay, which you'd end up with a result here, okay, for the red, if I put it up here, it's longer distance from the attractive force, the repulsive force, and it's a closer distance to, the north force, and then the opposite would be true for the other end of the little iron filing, in the sense it'd be closer to the attractive force, closer to the repulsive force of the north end, and further from the attractive force of the south end. And well, I should have drawn it the other way around, right? I should put the blue end over here because it's the opposite magnet. So, sorry. Little technical glitches in these live performances. So you can just get the idea that, well, the reason why it's lining up is because that's the balance. Okay, it's the one end's attracted more, one end's repelled more, one end's, and it all ends up being the same. So in all these certain locations, they're just going to line up, and then in other locations, it's going to line up clearly. In this location, the little piece of ferrite is going to line up with its south side hidden from the south side, and with its north side completely exposed to the south side, and it's just going to make a line, okay? And there'll be a bunch of lines, and as stated, these magnets all repel each other. So that's why they separate, and that's why you have little peaks in the ferrocell material when you put a magnet under it and it peaks. Those aren't standard lines. Those are equally repelling peaks, and the peaks are just about gravity. And the fact is the ferrofluid can't climb, can't go where it wants to go because of gravity, so it's sort of just stuck. So anyway, so that's probably enough of that. And I just wanted to point out that, so what's really happening, if you look with a microscope and you put a magnet face down in the fluid, okay, all it's doing, all the little bits are doing is they're just doing, so this is just, like say, the north side up, and all you have is this is what the fluid's doing, okay? That's it. There's no, it's all lining up this way. There's a bunch of spiral lines, and now you're taking light sources at these locations and shining the light onto these lines, and the simple truth is each line reflects at the right, the Brewster angle, whatever, the 45-degree angle, whatever the 49-degree angle is here on this one, and it's here on this line. These lines are really small, so it's a whole bunch of them, and it's here on this one, and it's here on this one, it's here on this one, it's here on this one, and it ends up being a curved line. but they're reflections of the light. Okay, so in the opposite's happening over here, the curve, right angle. And so you end up with these curved lines, and these curved lines can be really curved or just a little bit curved, and it just depends on how much of an angle you're looking at. So if you change your angle as you're looking at it, you'll change how big these curves are in terms of where the right angle is to reflect the light from the source. But no light beam is traveling the curve. The curve is caused by radial light coming off and reflecting off these points. So it doesn't have anything to do with showing you a pathway or anything like that. And all of that stuff is just a terrible misunderstanding of the reality. It's like blaming a magic trick on voodoo. I mean, it's just getting the answer so wrong. And she's had plenty of chance to admit the truth and accept the Ferrocell is a toy. It's not a scientific instrument. It shows you no depth. It shows you no deep. It'll give you no deeper understanding of how magnetism functions, because all it's going to show you is, misinformation. It's going to give you the impression that magnetism has something to do with a curved line. It's going to give you all kinds of misimpressions that have nothing to do with the truth. So what's part of this, there's just no point. I mean, these dissidents are just as dishonest as the regular physics. They're more dishonest than the regular physics, you have to say, in a way. They're really forcing the evidence to fit the theory they've chosen, and they will take all kinds of advantage of any kind of nuance or irregularity in something to say, oh, that's how it's working, and that's to force it to bend it to their mush. So she has right in the middle of her video, she just sits there and ruins the whole thing by saying, oh, go look at this video done showing you all this Ken Wheeler wooey crapola, and it's just that crap. So anyway, it's just here it is right here. Yeah, the hyperberloid bullshit has nothing to do with the truth. It has nothing to do with the real straight lines that are coming off of the magnet. The magnet's just like gravity. It's all straight line force. There's no curved lines. The curved path of the Earth is just it's an emergent function, but it's really made out of a bunch of straight line vectors of force. The forces are all moving can all be drawn accurately as straight lines. And the curved path is just a consequence of where the two straight lines oblige the Earth to be. But all the forces, all the machinery that's putting the Earth in its position, all of the machinery is straight line force. Yeah, that's probably enough of that. It's just disappointing. I mean, it's just such bullshit. Yeah. I mean, you're not doing the whole idea of these people just aren't doing dissidency any favor. I mean, it's fine to speculate. You want to say, oh, I'm just talking shit, what's the real truth? But they're not interested in hearing it, so you can't tell them what the truth is. They won't, like I said, I mean, all you gotta do is look under a microscope. You look under a microscope, the problem is solved. You'll see that, oh, yeah, it's doing exactly the same thing it would do, the bigger version would do. It's not doing anything different than what you would expect a magnet to do with little iron filings. It's the same exact thing, and it's just the fact that you've created a bunch of these, tiny surfaces to refract light that you're getting this illusion of a pattern. It's a real pattern. I'm just saying it's you're not really understanding how the pattern is being formed. It's not a beam of light that's forming the pattern. It's the fact that the light is coming out in all directions and it's reflecting off certain places a lot more than other places. because of the angles. Alright, so that's enough of that. So, yeah, we'll talk a little bit about this Steve Scully. Don't know what to say. I mean, he says, oh, I got this theory. His theory is ambiguous and mushy. So he's doing some two-slit analysis, and all he does is play the garbage videos and say, well, that was garbage. But he doesn't, So his theory is, I'm just doing this for the sake of just clarification. And again, this isn't even a difficult one for somebody to figure out. So he's blaming gravity. All right, and it's just such a poor thing to blame. It's just kind of, sad that he doesn't seem to understand that gravity is an insanely weak force, and especially, I would argue, I think you could kind of understand that it's really weak on the atomic scale. And I would argue it's pretty much non-existent on the atomic scale. Because electrons are actually making the gravity that a big thing has. But an electron will be moved in gravity. But the truth is, electrons moving is what's making gravity. So anyway, so he's proposing. Now obviously I likewise say that the slit experiment involves, the fact that some kind of real thing is going next to the surface. The surface, I would argue, is covered with electrons. The electrons aren't gravitationally bending the light. I mean, it's just kind of a preposterous theory. Big, giant, heavy things can't bend light. Why do you think a little tiny electron can do it? It's about how much gravity there is. All right, even the charge on an electron isn't enough to bend light, theoretically, even if we said light was bent. The amount of time the light would be going across the surface is so infinitesimal, and it's going the speed of light. It can't possibly be affected by even a strong charge, let alone gravity. Even if I believed it was bendable, which there's no evidence it is anyway. No good evidence. So I don't know why he believes that lensing is a real thing, that forces can be bent by forces, because that's kind of silly talk. It should require very good evidence before you fall for that one. So anyway, clearly that was, my impression 10 years ago was, the cause is somewhere on the surface, so he's got at least that part right. But yeah, it's not gravity, it's scatter. And you can't just say, well, it scatters into a pattern. You have to understand that the pattern has to be made out of something. And so you do know, frankly, the two sources have to produce the pattern. That's why this math actually works. If I take the distance between the two sources, that distance actually gets the right answer. And the reason why it gets the right answer, the surfaces are the right answer, is because something has to be happening at both surfaces for anything to happen here. And so we know that the single photon experiments theoretically are, you have to put a high standard on them in terms of an obligation to prove that there's actually only one photon in the experiment at a time. Until you really prove that only one photon is here and one photon, and there's no photon here, or there's a photon here and there's no photon here, until you prove that, I just say the burden is high, because the logic is, you really do have to be having a source coming from, a contribution has to be coming from here, and it has to be coming from here for each photon to be formed. The photon is essentially going to be made out of a contribution from this one and a contribution from this one, and that's actually going to make the photon, and that's why there's a bright spot, is because both have to provide a contribution, and without both of them providing the contribution, there won't be a photon here. So I would argue that's the more explicit truth. Now, the interesting experiment to do, so he was thinking, oh, well, I can prove this somehow by using titanium or something, some heavy metal, and therefore it'll bend more or something. And no, that's not going to work. See, the number of electrons on surfaces is kind of fixed. You don't really have surfaces that have more electrons in terms of the surface layer between the atmosphere and a substance, because the atmosphere is always the standard part, right? The air, no matter what substance I use down here, substance X, the air substance is always Y. It's always air. So it's always going to create a balance. And yes, where the line is of the balance, that is how many electrons there are, is sort of dictated by the air. Okay, I mean, you can change where the border between the two might be, but you can't really change what's happening in the air portion. It'll always sort of be the same. So, because it's the same substance each time. So I would argue that that's why you don't see much irregularity in any bending. And again, the argument is that it's scatter, that is, it's going in all directions. So it really couldn't make much difference how many electrons there are. That would only mean that you would have a higher percentage of the pattern. So all you could really change is how much of the light goes here in the center part, that goes through the slit without being screwed up, versus how much fringe light there is. So if you could add up how much fringe light there is, and then compare it to how much middle light there is, maybe what the slit material is made out of will change those proportions. But you're really not going to see it as some sort of obvious thing. If I make slits out of plastic and I make them out of metal, what's really going to decide is this distance. And even if there was, this was 87% of the light with the plastic and it was 93% of the light with metal, you're probably not going to be able to see that. So you're going to really have to look for it to see the difference. But yeah, I might speculate that that would be a difference you could detect. Anyway, the more interesting experiment, I think, would be to charge the surfaces. Now, the problem is this is such a narrow gap that the charge you can put on here has to be pretty small because you're going to start sparking. So, the trick would be to do the experiment carefully enough, I suppose, where you could, maybe put 1,000 volts on it, on these surfaces, and see how much that would change the pattern. Now the trick is, whatever extra charge you have here, extra electrons, and you have less electrons here, what you're really going to do to the pattern, again, is just to either make more fringes, that is, brighter ones or less bright. You're probably not going to change where they are. Because again, the experiment is just saying, all I want is scatter. I don't really care. It doesn't really have anything to do with what direction the photons take after they interact with the electrons. It just has to do with the fact that they go in a direction. There's just as much light going to the dark spots as the light sparks. It's just the light's broken. It's out of phase. It can't be received. But if it was a radio signal, I could sort of explain that, no, there's plenty of radio hitting here. Okay, it's just that a receiver doesn't receive it. And the same is true for light. It has to be received. That is, it has to hit a surface in the right manner. It has to hit it and then hit it again at just the right distance to add energy to an electron to cause electricity. So it's very time dependent, and it's just about phase. And if I change the phase, then I've broken the time dependency. I'm hitting at the wrong time. I'm hitting the pendulum when it's swinging in the wrong direction. And I won't get what's a photon. I'll get swinging. I'll get stuff happening. All the same number of interactions are happening here. There's just as much activity here. It's just that it's the wrong activity, okay? It's slowing the pendulum down rather than making the pendulum swing more because of the timing. So, I can poke pendulums, and there'll be times when I poke it and I add energy, and there'll be times when I take energy out of the pendulum. And those two are very different consequences to the same action. The same amount of energy I'm putting in, and I'm getting a very different result from the pendulum. So I'm just saying that same effect is happening inside the matter, and that's the simple explanation. So anyway, yeah, back to the gravity argument. So I just explained briefly on gravity. I'll give you a clue to the truth, and just point out how you're wrong-headed here. Gravity doesn't automatically happen. So a thing like an electron, if it's sitting there still, it's not producing any gravity at all. It has no gravity. Even if its mass was 1 million trillion, okay, the truth is it not made out of electrons moving. Okay, so the electron can't be made out of moving electrons. And the only way you produce gravity is by having electrons. So I have to have electrons inside of something, and they have to move in a direction. And when they move in a direction, that means they consumed a force. A force was occupied pushing them. And so the force that was going this way slows down because it's got to push an electron. The electron moves from point A to point B, and the force only moves as fast as the electron moves, which is slower than the speed of light, so therefore it's lost a little bit of momentum. And that little bit of momentum, that little tiny bit of momentum, when you add it up in a big giant object like the Earth, it has, gazillions of gazillions, times 10 to the 4938 electrons in it. It has this preposterous number of electrons in it, and it's those electrons that are slowly consuming little bits of force. I don't know if that showed up. Probably did. To see how the screensaver worked. So it's just that's what the mechanism's made out of. Is you have to move the electron. So if an electron is sitting, it can't be gravitational. And it's only gravitational when it absorbs energy by moving in a direction. So if it moves in this direction, it means it absorbed a little bit of energy going this way, so it has gravity going that way. But it doesn't have gravity going this way or any other way at that moment. So it can only have gravity in the direction it's moving. If it's coming at you, it had to absorb a force to be doing that. Unless, of course, somebody shot a gun behind it, then that's not gravity, because it didn't take the energy from the field to move. See, the Earth is taking energy from the random field. It's taking energy from all directions, all the time. So it's making gravity. The force is coming in, and a little less force is coming out, and that's in every direction. But an electron can't do that, because electrons moving is what makes gravity. So you really have no hope even with the standard model of gravity. You have no hope because the amount of gravity you have on the surface of an electron is such a tiny, 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 tiny thing. It's just so tiny as a real force. I can't even describe how tiny it is. It's so tiny. 10 to the minus 400 again. It's just a hugely tiny, even by conventional physics notion of mass equals gravity. Mass equals gravity. Well, it really doesn't for the electron and the proton. So they only make gravity. They make gravity. They cause it, and they're certainly affected by it. When the Earth is spewing out less force, any electron here is certainly going to feel it. It's going to feel there's more force hitting me this way than hitting me that way. Therefore, I'm going to go that way because I'm getting hit by more force. But they can't make force until they absorb a force by moving. So, the conventional theory says you're way out of luck. The amount of time, the amount of exposure to the rays of gravity, say a photon was going by an electron. The amount of exposure is so minute, even on the surface, there's no chance you could bend a photon and see the bending, the huge amount of bending. It makes no sense at all. It's mathematically impossible. You're just so out of luck with that theory. So I'd either do some rethinking or just say, yeah, Gary, you're right. I get your point. All of this makes so much more sense. You've got the right answer, so I'll move on to some other subject, because this subject's already solved by Gary. Anyway, so probably enough of a video and such. It's irritating because I know I'm right. These are solid. This simple model couldn't have just by accident solved these long, anguished over questions so well and so completely and so connected to each other. The same rule works You know, and you can move it to magnetism, and you can move it to gravity, and you can move it around to electricity, and you can move it to the atoms, and you can move it around, and it works. And it just couldn't work. There's 10 times 10 to the minus 600 million as a probability that such a simple model could actually answer the same questions, and it's wrong. Nah. No likelihood, no probability, really. It's just no. There's no wave function for that. So anyway, till the next time and such. I guess I'll just hit the button and go. Well, I should hit that first. Yeah, because it's fun. And I can do my this thingy. I wonder if I do this thing and the same time hit the other thing. I wonder what will happen. I can't reach it. That's the problem. Keyboard's on the wrong side of me. Yeah, too bad. Anyway, so we'll just move on. Well, I guess I could do it. I could hit that again. I could quickly. Oh, look at that. It stays right in the middle. Cool. Yeah, might as well stay over here. Alright, anyway. Hopefully it's a video and such, and so forth and whatnot.